It was unbearable. I had to abort the protocol, abort, and switch back to intramuscular. Now, here's the odd thing, he goes. Now, here's something really fucking important that I want everybody to stop and pay attention to. Usually, TRT protocols take several weeks to stabilize. However, within 24 hours of switching back to intramuscular, all the symptoms had been resolved and felt amazing again. SubQ versus IM. Yeah, the infamous debate. Listen, in this video, what I want to do is break down both sides, but I also want to make sure that people know where I personally stand, having looked at many men and their responses to testosterone doing SubQ versus intramuscular. We will break down my personal preference on all esters of injecting testosterone. I want to highlight some of the pitfalls of doing subcutaneous injections where it doesn't work for that individual, and we'll also discuss how it does work for some individuals and perhaps why. But the bottom line is, I mean, look, there are guys that don't have sexual function on testosterone no matter what they do if they're doing SubQ, but the moment they switch to deep intramuscular with a 1 inch or more needle, well, then they have libido and then they have erections back. But we will make clear one thing, and that is that the people that are saying, why not do SubQ and SubQ is better and SubQ is the same as IM, this is wrong. It's also not true. They are not the same at all. The effects, the pharmacokinetics, the absorption, how much medication the depot can hold, all of this is different. So after 6 years of doing consults on TRT, after years of experimenting with every different ester myself, being the guy that gets people that have deranged TRT protocols that I've got to fix, I'm going to give you my perspective on SubQ versus IM. Cortex Labs is a performance optimization and hormone consulting company for men. We've got a range of different products ranging from nootropics to coaching with me. The most popular product right now is the Torque Nootropics Stack, which is a nootropic stack that I built, basically Adderall without the side effects. It's buy one, get one free right now. The code is in the description of this video. Coaching, I'm the world's most sought after coach for sexual function and sexual dysfunction, for optimizing people's TRT protocols around energy, sexual function, libido, erectile optimization, a host of other things like dopamine restoration and nootropic design. You can hire me for either singular packages where we get on a call and I design a protocol for you, or longer term one-on-one packages where we get the most work done. And you can do that in under a minute at livecortex.com. So I would like to start the video by just giving my perspective on this, just cut and dry right in the beginning so that you have a definitive answer and don't have to search for the rest of the video. What do I think is better in terms of injecting testosterone, subcutaneous injections versus intramuscular injections? And the answer to that question is, in terms of absorption, in terms of efficacy, in terms of being able to dial in faster, in terms of getting the most bang for your buck, and in terms of getting predictable results the way that long esters particularly were intended to inject, I think that deep intramuscular with a 1 inch or more, between a 1 inch and a 1.5 inch needle is best. Now, that doesn't mean that in certain situations, subcutaneous injections might be better because they might be better tolerated. They might come with less side effects. They might come with a little less peaks of estradiol, and that they might generally be easier for people. The other overarching point that I want to get across before we get to some Reddit threads and really get down deep into the science of intramuscular versus subcutaneous, as well as other people's experiences, is that, again, since I'm the guy that gets people coming into me to book consults that have sexual dysfunction on TRT, that just can't get their morning wood straight, their libido straight, it's just hit or miss, or it's non-existent in some cases. The first and most important thing that I do that usually dramatically changes the outcome for the positive is get them to inject deep intramuscular, very deep intramuscular. And for some of these guys, an 1.5 inch needle, 25 gauge 1.5 inch. I'm going to show you those needles. They're actually the best needles to use for TRT in my opinion, because you don't really cause scarring. It's a very thin needle, but it's long enough to get deep intramuscular. But doing deep IM in these guys resolves their libido and their erection problems. Okay. All of that said, let's just quick look at this graph and click out of the pop-up that just popped up and understand that this right here is a proper intramuscular injection. If I, had it my way, I think that needle would be slightly down a little further, but this is adequate. Listen, the amount of metabolism, the rate at which you're going to metabolize testosterone, as well as the quantity of blood vessels to transport that testosterone in a deeper intramuscular tissue, even versus shallow intramuscular tissue, because it is different, is much more sufficient ultimately to deliver testosterone in your system. The muscle layer actually holds more of the medication. Okay, so you can hold a bigger depot, which would allow for more of the medication to be absorbed than this subcutaneous layer, which is only a very thin layer that spreads out horizontally. Whereas in an intramuscular injection, you're going to get horizontal and vertical expansion of the material in the depot, allowing for more systemic absorption. With subcutaneous injections, you have less medication carrying ability, medication metabolizing ability than you do intramuscular injections. Okay, this is a subcutaneous injection here. The muscle layer is down here. Sure, you have some blood capillaries. You are going to have some extravascular tissue, which refers to space not occurring and not contained in blood vessels, outside of the blood vessel. So from a purely scientific standpoint, subcutaneous injections are inferior to intramuscular injections in terms of rate of absorption, as well as the amount of space available for the depot. I theorize that when people get a loss of effect or a less pronounced effect when they're doing subcutaneous injections, it is merely because they cannot absorb enough of the medication at a time. And via the fact that this is an extravascular injection site being subcutaneous, some of that material, there's no studies on this, so this is just my theoretical position on this, but I think it's correct. Some of that material in the depot does not get absorbed. It's unclear what happens to that material over time and if it eventually does absorb it at a much slower rate. But suffice to say, looking at the blood capillaries, the extravascular tissue compared to the blood vessel function and the ability to absorb medication, the space within which medication can actually sit and then be absorbed in the bloodstream, the rate at which it does that if you were to look at one of the other deep intramuscular is the superior injection method in terms of absorption. Now, I think it would be wise for us to go to Reddit and to look at people's experiences, because a lot of these experiences mirror my experience in coaching, where some people just don't get the effects, the response that they need to get or should get with TRT using subcutaneous injection. So here's a post titled, "Why are you guys still doing IM shots?" And what's important about this post is to highlight that here's a person who is unwilling to look out of what they may have been told by a few studies. There's only a few studies on subcutaneous injections, and they certainly don't apply to everybody. Obviously, they don't align with I wouldn't call it clinical experience, but my consulting experience at all. They don't align with them at all. So there's got to be something a little wrong with those studies, or at the very least, they're not applicable to everyone. But this is someone with that ideology: less erythrocytosis, less hematocrit, less peaks, et cetera, which in most cases they are correct. But it also means, therefore, and obviously, by nature of having less of these things, that you're getting less of the material ultimately absorbed and affecting receptor sites, androgen receptor function, androgen receptor mediated genetic expression as well. Let's start looking at some of the comments that I think are relevant for us to point out. Number one, I feel better on IM. This one here. My test results are quite different between the two choices. The second one, preference. I've done both. My blood work shows higher levels in intramuscular, and anecdotally, I do feel better doing injections intramuscular. The guy, I would get itchy. Also, those itchy patches left visible stains on my skin. Maybe it was an allergy to the oil. Don't know. Glad I moved to IM. Now, here's one that's really important. Again, SubQ works for some people, so I don't want people in the comment section going, well, SubQ works for me. If you do that, I'm going to ignore your comment completely. Here's a thread that is titled, "Anyone else feel like shit on SubQ and shallow intramuscular injections?" Guy goes, "I have no idea why, but SubQ makes me feel like I'm dying." You're dying, bro. Feel so shitty. Brain fog so bad I can't function. Anxiety, nausea, etc. Shallow IM with a slim pin has the same effect, but lighter version though. Far away from feeling good. So here's an example where SubQ, the guy obviously isn't absorbing the testosterone at the rate that he needs to, or at the quantity that he needs to. Going shallow intramuscular really doesn't solve the problem, but it makes it a little bit better, right? This is why, again, in terms of superiority, deep intramuscular is always going to win. And that's just the facts. Again, you can argue that SubQ might be better for side effects and hematocrit and all these sorts of things, not puncturing the muscle tissue, which I'm going to give you a hack for here in a bit. And all those things are valid arguments. I want to make that clear that I acknowledge that. However, in terms of absorption, the superior injection method is intramuscular. I goes deep, old school intramuscular intramuscular, and all these weird, very shitty side effects do not happen. Now, this is something really important that I also want to highlight. Again, I'm the guy that gets people booking me for consults that have sexual dysfunction or otherwise issues on TRT, and a good degree of them are doing some of these newer age injection methods where they're doing shallow IM with a half-inch insulin pin, or they're doing subcutaneous in the quad or the belly or something with testosterone. And a fraction of these people, some of them do fine, okay, but a fraction of those people have weird side effects. I've had guys be dizzy on subcutaneous injections. I've had guys completely lose their sexual function to the point where they have post-finasteride syndrome or post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, like sexual side effects, like completely cold glands, a numb dick, a complete lack of sexual desire, no morning wood, no spontaneous erections, cannot perform during sex, not even 20 milligrams tadalafil gives them erections. That's significantly fucking problematic. You know, a host of really weird side effects. Now, why would this happen? It's hard to say. There may be, again, such a slow distribution of the testosterone and an actual net material loss in the subcutaneous tissue because it's extravascular, that some of that material may be ending up in places that they don't want it to end up, triggering an inflammatory response and a release of gut-borne cytokines. This is not good and is not going to make you feel good. But again, at the very least, they're not getting enough testosterone at once absorbing. Because I wish I could do shallow slim pin injections. It's so much easier and easier to measure, blah, blah, blah. Anyone else have to do deep harpoon IM injections to feel good from testosterone? So he makes another good point. Yes, it is easier. It is easier to do SubQ. It's just easier. I've done subcutaneous, like, you know, a few times with different protocols and testosterone, and it's not that it was easier because it's the same amount of time. It actually takes longer. It actually takes longer because you get these very thin needles. It's hard to draw the material in these very high gauge needles, like the half-inch insulin syringes. You're sitting there forever, especially when injecting large amounts. I could never do that on cycle. Fucking never. I'd be sitting there for 10 minutes trying to get the testosterone out of the vial, and it would take an equally ridiculous amount of time to actually inject the material. Whereas a lower gauge, bigger needle, it's in the syringe quickly, it's in the muscle, it's out of the syringe into my body a lot quicker. But in terms of not poking your muscle, whatever, not drawing blood, yeah, I mean, SubQ is convenient. It's ultimately a little less scary. And that's the big allure. Now let's just switch to the hack real quick for those of you interested in doing a proper testosterone injection. If you're having side effects or you can't get your libido straight on testosterone injections, I had recently found these, and these by far have been the best needles to inject testosterone for me personally. This is a 25 gauge, which is a somewhat high gauge, so not 23 gauge. So it's actually a very thin needle. You barely feel that thing going in. You barely feel it puncturing the muscle. It's almost like doing a SubQ injection where you're like, wow, that was painless. That was easy. It went right in. It was very awesome. It's thin, but not thin enough to worry about breaking, but it's 1.5 inches. Okay. When I inject with this syringe and these needles, which are luer lock, by the way, so you can inject with a different, bigger needle to get the material into the syringe faster. And then you just put this luer lock 1.5 inch needle at the end of it. For me, I love these. On cycle, I'm running these. When I go back to TRT, I'm going to run these. Deep intramuscular in the quad or the delt in the glute. All of that works for me, but it's got to be, I mean, minimally 5/8 inch, but I like these much better. A full 1.5 inch deep into the muscle. It's a thin needle. You barely feel it. It is very, very easy. So this is the hack for people worried about, especially scar tissue in the muscle. Okay. This is akin to SubQ in that regard. You're really not doing yourself a disservice by using these particularly. So please copy that or like look at it and go type that into Amazon because you're going to find these. Once you get them, you're going to recognize how awesome they are. Back to the thread. SubQ gives me panic attacks. Estrogen conversion goes mad. I have no idea why, but it's a thing for some people. Deep IM for me, no issues. So again, people are going to be different and some people do good on SubQ. I want to again acknowledge that for the warriors in the comment section that go, I've been doing SubQ for 2 years and it's fine. I fucking know. But you know, your N equals 1 means nothing, first of all, and it's just not the case for everybody. Why would SubQ in this case be giving a guy panic attacks, and what would estrogen conversion go about? Well, subcutaneous injections are a constant, you know, sort of steady state delivering of testosterone rather than boluses at once, which may be better and what actually the medication was suited for. And therefore, 4, you're getting constant conversion of estradiol. You have constant spillover. You have 0 trough, by the way, no trough of estrogen. So the estrogen just kind of stays elevated at its rate. Years on TRT, switch to SubQ. So this guy's been doing intramuscular injections for years on testosterone. Switch to subcutaneous 3 times a week instead of weekly IM, and I feel like I am crashing. Not sure if it's in my head. It's not. People would have you think that, and that's ridiculous. But my libido, okay? To the sexual system. My libido seems reduced and not getting morning wood. I switched 2.5 weeks ago to SubQ, same dose. I don't have any reason to think I'm doing it wrong or why that would make a difference. Anyone experiencing anything like this? Again, here's where people are confused. He goes, why would that make a difference? People are just so dumbfounded that switching the injection method completely into something that is ultimately inferior in specific terms of absorption compared to intramuscular, that there would be some lesser of a response. Like, that's Reddit dogma and ideology infused into a person's brain over what worked for them, over what their own eyes can see. This is why ideology and dogma are so dangerous in situations regarding TRT, and why I'm so passionate about certain topics on testosterone, because when you've got ideas that a large majority of people are accepting, it does this weird psychological thing where it blinds you to what your own experience has been. And again, you got people in the comment section like Swoops, who's I think commented on this channel several times, has commented on he's pretty active in the Reddit community. I think guy actually knows this stuff. Goes, yeah, slower absorption with SubQ is the general consensus. Wait it out or go back to IM. I never liked SubQ. No, he makes a good point here. Wait it out. SubQ over time will build up testosterone levels, albeit slower. So you might feel like you're crashing in the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but then it balances out after a month. And so then you're fine with SubQ. However, who the fuck has a month to wait, feeling terrible when you've got a business to run, or you've got work to do, if you've got kids to take care of? It just isn't practical for some people. Another guy, SubQ didn't work for me either. I did it for 2 weeks and it also crashed, went back to intramuscular. It's weird because my test SIP is in grapeseed oil, even says on the script SubQ or IM. SubQ didn't work for me either. I went back to intramuscular. Last one, and then we'll talk about the differences in the studies and why the studies say that it's a perfectly viable route of injecting testosterone, but it just doesn't work for some people. This is titled Switching to SubQ, a Warning. You guys, guy goes, let me start off by saying I'm aware that many people use SubQ injections very successfully. Perfect. Okay, perfect. Yes, that's a good way to acknowledge that some people do, and it's totally fine for them. Again, people have different needs in terms of testosterone. Why did you go on TRT to begin with? For a lot of people, they were having lackluster morning wood or erections or libido. So those people have, via androgen deprivation, a downregulation of androgen receptors, as well as a downregulation of nitric oxide and blood flow in the penis. This is all documented and is restored usually by testosterone, but in some cases only partially by testosterone and fully by actual exogenous use of dihydrotestosterone. So if you've got androgen receptor deprivation induced by androgen deprivation and nitric oxide and blood vessel health impairments in penile tissue, yes, you're going to require more boluses of more rapidly absorbable testosterone at once, which you would do intramuscularly and not SubQ, versus a slow release subcutaneous injection. This is the difference between people, folks. So before SubQ, he's doing 160 divided into 2 shots intramuscular per week. Switch to SubQ, same dose, but now split into 3 doses per week. So you think this would be good because you'd have less estrogen conversion and less hematocrit and all this. First week went fine. Then he goes, out of nowhere, started feeling very off. And for the following 2 weeks, I had nonstop anxiety and overstimulation. Now, how the hell could this be? If you got a less slow absorption and seemingly just a better all-around way of injecting testosterone, well, how does the guy have anxiety and overstimulation? Anyone's guess, because this hasn't been studied either, right? Steady state, constant steady state, and no troughs of testosterone would certainly equal, or would plausibly equal, I should say, more conversion to dopamine in the brain via tyrosine hydroxylase upregulation, those enzymes that convert your tyrosine into usable L-dopa. And so that could be the case, right? There's more steady state estrogen, which also affects neurotransmitters. And the primary negative effects in terms of anxiety that estrogen has on a male body is really in terms of neurotransmitters. It's keeping neurotransmitters around longer and ultimately preventing their clearance. And he says something that I think is really important, which is why a lot of people, when trying to switch to SubQ, end up going back to IM. And he goes, I could not maintain this protocol for 46 weeks and get bloods to investigate it further. It was unbearable. I had to abort the protocol, abort, and switch back to intramuscular. Now, here's the odd thing, he goes. Now, here's something really fucking important that I want everybody to stop and pay attention to. Usually, TRT protocols take several weeks to stabilize. However, within 24 hours of switching back to intramuscular, all the symptoms had been resolved and felt amazing again. So what was happening here? My guess is that the guy was in a relative testosterone deficiency with an imbalance in sex hormones. But the important thing here is like within 24 hours of switching back to intramuscular, all the symptoms resolved and he feels amazing again. So listen, the bottom line with, I'll make this last point about SubQ versus intramuscular. If you're having problems, again, people need to pay attention to my conditional if-then statements rather than thinking that I'm making blanket statements, which again annoys me very heavily. So please pay attention. If you're on subcutaneous injections and you have no libido and erections on TRT, or you're having wacky side effects on TRT, then you really should consider injecting deep intramuscular with at least a 1-inch needle and preferably a 1.5-inch needle. Those are the needles that you're actually supposed to use with TRT. If you look at both the literature, the inserts, instructions, but ultimately the historically set in stone instructions on how to use testosterone cypionate or testosterone enanthate, it is with a 1.5-inch needle using a deep intramuscular injection. That's the instructions. Yeah, people asking questions on the web, my vial says for deep intramuscular use only. Can I do it SubQ? And people are like, yeah, because some people can. The metabolic processes and the extravascular tissue is sufficient enough for them in the subcutaneous layers of their skin to absorb enough testosterone for them to get a good result. But that's just not going to be for everyone. And for those people that are having issues with SubQ, go back to tried and true. Go back to what we know works. Go back to what has historically been suggested. Go back to what has historically been suggested as the official instruction to inject this testosterone, which is deep intramuscular, 1.5-inch needle. My personal experience, which is only an N=1. So I have my clients' experience and a good degree of them that have sexual dysfunction on SubQ, they get better on deep intramuscular injections. And maybe we have to switch the ester as well. Maybe we don't. It all really depends. But those guys get better when they're injecting testosterone as it was meant to be injected, just deep IM. So that does weigh heavily. My N=1 shouldn't weigh heavily, but I'll give it to you anyway. And that is that when injecting doses of testosterone for TRT doses, meaning 150 to 250 milligrams of testosterone per week, I only do well, specifically in terms of the sexual system when I'm going deep intramuscular. Okay. If I go SubQ on lower doses, I have to go ultra low so that there's really no estradiol at all. It's like 12 to 15 picograms per milliliter. Then I'm fine, but I don't have anabolism and I generally feel like fucking shit. But on regular TRT doses of 120 to 175, if I'm doing SubQ, I just don't perform well sexually. I feel fine, but it's not enough absorption and bolus testosterone at once, activate the ARs, facilitate nitric oxide, activate the brain regions associated with libido to get me adequate libido and erectile function on testosterone. I've got to use the same dose deep intramuscular in the delts, the quads, or the glutes, and then all of that stuff is regulated and good. So that's my personal experience. Again, it's an N=1 and it doesn't weigh a lot because it's an N=1, but I should give it to you anyway because it might be useful for you to factor that into your equation. In the end, SubQ is going to work for some guys on TRT. It's just gonna. Again, the extravascular tissue and the distribution of the medication is gonna work for them, right? For how much testosterone they need. But keep in mind, for people that are going on TRT with libido issues, which is a lot of people, and erection issues, they have androgen deprivation. And androgen deprivation induces a downregulation of both 5-alpha reductase as well as the androgen receptors, and additionally nitric oxide and blood flow to the penis. And in these serious issues of androgen deprivation, as I've said before, only DHT, exogenous DHT, can fully resolve the erectile issues. But, also testosterone partially restores it. But if you went, like I've had cases where I've had to go very high in just testosterone, not use DHT, and it fixed the problem, but we had to upregulate nitric oxide. We had to upregulate androgen receptors. We had to upregulate 5-alpha reductase enzymes. We were only able to do that by boluses of testosterone a lot at once, more than TRT doses for sure, but all deep intramuscular. SubQ wasn't doing shit. So the people that can afford to do SubQ, or I should say that they do fine on SubQ, well, they don't need like massive androgen receptor 5-alpha reductase overhaul. They don't need nitric oxide overhaul. Their systems are relatively fine, or maybe they were a little subpar before TRT, but it, very quickly, even with subcutaneous injections, that system went back to normal and they're fine. They're good to go. I'm not talking to those people here, and those are the people that can do fine on SubQ. But there are people that require more boluses at once, a larger reservoir within which to hold medication, which you can get in the intramuscular tissue versus the subcutaneous tissue, as well as faster absorption in order to get the androgen receptor mediated gene transcription and all the subsequent powerful effects at the sexual level, at the neurological level regarding the sexual cascades, and obviously at the penile tissue level in order to have adequate libido and erections on TRT. So all of that said, again, my opinion is there is a superior injection method and it is intramuscular. There's just no question about that. I mean, talking about brass tacks, right? We're not talking about what maybe works for somebody or works for other. We're talking about in terms of absorption. Intramuscular is superior. There's no debate about that at all. But different strokes for different folks, depending on their states. And ultimately, that's my take on the matter. If I was given a choice in 90% of situations, I would have a person and I myself would inject deep intramuscular with a 1-inch or 1.5-inch needle. All right, boys, look, again, I'm the guy that gets people that have deranged sexual function on TRT or otherwise that are going on TRT, that have wacky TRT protocols that aren't working for them, and we fix them relatively quickly. I've got a TRT specific coaching program, which you can find down in the bottom of the coaching page. You can find the description of this video. I've also got one-on-one coaching programs where over a long duration of time, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, we fix all the biological issues you have regarding sexual function, libido, erectile function, brain function, dopamine restoration. We design nootropic stacks if you want. Host of other things that fall into my specialty, and you can hire me for any of these things in under a minute at livecortex.com. All right, brother. It has been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. Hope you had a great week so far. Hope you're ready for the weekend. Tomorrow, live stream, 9 a.m. Eastern time. So be there, be square. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of the week. And I will talk to you guys on the next one.